talked about the allegory of the caves, and you may remember that Plato made 2 points. One was that most of what we see are only images of reality that are cast upon the wall of the caves. And the second point, which is what I want to talk about today, is that if someone breaks the chains and leaves the cave and then comes back and wants to tell people what reality really is, people reject him. They don't want to hear that. They're very happy with looking at the images that they can see, and that's their reality. So the reason after I got done doing that, I was reflecting, and it was sort of interesting. In the collect from the Roman Catholic Mass for Thursday, April 18th, it says that we have known it more fully, so that those you have freed from the darkness of error may cling more firmly to the teachings of your truth. The darkness of your error in the cave, and the teachings of your truth. Then in the Gospel, according to John, Jesus is quoted as saying, "Not that anyone has seen the Father except the one who is from God. He has seen the Father." Now, what's the point of all this? Let me give you a little bit more background. Years and years ago, I read a book by a Princeton scholar on the early church, and she postulated that Jesus was seen as a rebel, a leader of the rebel causes. You recall that Jerusalem, Israel, was under the control of the Roman Empire, and there was a sizable movement to try to overthrow the Romans and to reinstore local control. And of course, there was a problem there, because the Jewish leaders who had been installed by the Roman Empire liked the situation that they were in. It's sort of like the Vichy government in France during World War II. They had the power basically because the Romans allowed them to run the country, and according to what the Romans wanted them to do. So along comes this fellow who seems to be very popular and whose crowds are following all over the place, and he is talking about something totally new that was really contrary to established Jewish law and principles. Of course, this made them very uncomfortable, and they began to think about some way that they could get rid of this guy. But their powers were limited. They couldn't just order somebody to be killed, and only the Romans could do that. So how would they get the Romans to get rid of this troublemaker? Well, as you know, they cooked up this charge of him being a leader of the rebels, and got the Romans to execute him accordingly, along with a couple of other criminals. In the process, they convinced the people that it would be better to have a murderer released than this rebel leader, because the murderer could do very little harm to them, whereas the rebel leader could usurp their authority and basically destroy their nice, comfortable little lifestyle. So, now these are all my thoughts, that's all. They're just postulations from things I've read and things I've thought about. But, it makes sense to me. Once I begin to look at things this way, I can begin to understand maybe better what really happened way back then. And given Plato's point, which was written like 300 to 400 years before the life of Christ, it makes sense. He had seen the light. He had seen God. He came to tell people what it was they needed to do to have eternal life with God. That was his mission. That was his mission. And that's what he set about doing. But people didn't like the message. The leadership didn't like the message. I think the people did, but the leadership didn't. And so they came up with their scheme and got rid of him. At least they thought they did. But it turns out that all they did was make it even more difficult for them in the long run, because he didn't die. To me, God is spirit, not some old guy sitting on a cloud someplace. He is a spirit that permeates the universe. And it's a spirit that I have no ability whatsoever to comprehend, except to really believe that it exists. And it has capabilities far beyond my greatest imagination. It was that spirit that created Jesus. It was that spirit that they sent then and now amongst us. If we just are quiet and open to that spirit, knowledge, wisdom, thoughts come to us. We know what to do. We know what the next right thing is. We might not always like it, but we know what it is. And then it's up to us to carry it out. You know, when I go back to the allegory of the caves, the fact that those messengers that get free of the caves have seen the light and come back in the caves to tell us, no, there's a whole different world. There's a much better world out there than sitting here in this dark, dank cave looking at the wall. There's a beautiful world out there. But we don't want that message, because it's not what our filters have told us is reality. The word for those filters, incidentally, is the paradigms. They're paradigms. They are patterns of thoughts or behaviors that permeate our thinking and give us a reference to use in determining what we're going to allow into our consciousness and what we're not going to allow into our consciousness. And we have got to be aware of those paradigms. We've got to be aware that we are closing out valid, necessary, needed messages that will show us a better way to live, a spiritual way to live. We're so trapped in this materialistic world that we forget that the real meaning of life does not come from things. It comes from God. It comes from that spirit, that feeling that we have within us that no amount of money can buy. I'm just very grateful that I picked up the old allegory of the caves and looked at it. Then, of course, as always happens to me, then the next thing I read is something right out of the scriptures that reinforces it. So anyway, I hope these thoughts are useful to you. They certainly have been to me on my spiritual journey, and again, give me more challenges to look at and how to really live a spiritual life.